As nervous as I am about Episode 9 and this end of the Skywalker saga, and about the legacy of this entire sequel trilogy, I am hyped for The Rise of Skywalker. It's the most I've been hyped for any film since 2005 and Revenge of the Sith, which is actually a very refreshing state to be in, because The Last Jedi at the time left me very lukewarm about Episode 9. And hey, I like The Last Jedi. I've made peace with it in the last 2 years, and I like it much more than I did at the time. But it feels good to be back in a position where I'm excited for the next Star Wars movie. But the reality is that this film has a lot of pressure on it. A great deal of pressure on it, perhaps more than any other film I can think of in recent memory. There's a lot that could go very wrong, and there's a lot that I think this film needs to do. And I hope very much that it is able to avoid the missteps and the disasters and succeed in doing those things that it needs to do and in fulfilling its destiny. So here in this video, I've basically just broken down the 10 things, or the top 10 things, that The Rise of Skywalker really needs to do, and in some cases not do. And I don't really care about things like the Knights of Ren or Darth Jar Jar, or whether or not we get an Ahsoka Tano cameo or any of that stuff. But there are some very key things that Episode 9 really does need to deliver on. And these are not nitpicky or fanboyish little bits of trivia, but very significant, important things that have everything to do with both the Star Wars saga as a whole and the legacy of this sequel trilogy itself. Number one, and I'm starting with this because it's the most important of all of them, is that we need to not retcon Return of the Jedi. And this is where the Palpatine's return, could be a really big problem, depending on how his presence in Episode 9 is handled. If it turns out that Vader slash Anakin didn't effectively kill the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, then that's a big retconning, and it will go down really badly with almost everyone. It will be even worse if it turns out that Rey is now the one to ultimately defeat Palpatine, thus taking that distinction away from Anakin and Luke. It's deeply important to the existing lore and the narrative that it was specifically Anakin or Vader who overthrew the Emperor. That's the ending that resonates with everything we saw in Revenge of the Sith and the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. It's the ending that remains the most appropriate and the most poetic. Any retconning of that will be a major, misstep, no matter how much I like Rey, and I really do like Rey. If Kylo if Kylo Ren turns out to be the one to defeat Palpatine, then that's at least better, as he is at least a Skywalker. But even this would still be an inferior ending to the one we already have in Return of the Jedi. My biggest fear going into this is that Episode 9 will retcon the saga in such a way as to damage all of Star Wars. And for a lot of people, this will be the final straw as far as this trilogy goes. I hope Abrams and co. are fully aware of how much of a no-go area this should be. That it should be considered an absolute no-no. An absolute no-no to do anything in the story that undermines or changes the end of Return of the Jedi and what it meant. Number two, Episode 9 should not dismiss or retcon The Last Jedi. Now, whatever your opinion of The Last Jedi is, whether you love it or hate it, it cannot be ignored or dismissed from the final equation. I happen to like The Last Jedi on many levels, and I dislike it on some other levels, but regardless, Abrams' story needs to maintain some relationship or follow-through with Rian Johnson's story. Why? Because Episode 9 could potentially make The Last Jedi an even stronger, more worthy film, depending on what it does. This could be in reaction or in relation to what kind of Luke Skywalker we see in Episode 9, or how it relates to his sacrifice in The Last Jedi, or what he learnt from the ancient Jedi text on Acto. It could also relate to Kylo and Rey's deep Force connection in The Last Jedi and what that means for Episode 9 and the conclusion of the Skywalker saga. In fact, The Last Jedi introduced so many mysterious elements and intriguing possibilities that Episode 9 could really expand on and make a lot more of. Examples being Ghost Yoda's apparent ability to physically interact with his environment, an idea previously absent in Force Ghosts, We saw Yoda summon lightning to set fire to the Force Tree. We also saw him physically knock Luke on the head with his cane. This could pave the way for Luke to have all kinds of abilities in Episode 9, to be able to return not just as a ghost, but as someone with the ability to physically interact with the real world and influence real world events. What we saw of Yoda in The Last Jedi, and even what we saw of Luke at the end of The Last Jedi, creates all kinds of possibilities, including the possibility of Luke being really heavily involved in the climatic events in Episode 9, including the confrontation with Palpatine. But there's more examples. I mean, it's never really explained in The Last Jedi, for example, why certain things happen, like Luke being able to hand Han Solo's dice to Leia, despite not being physically present, or why Kylo is able to pick up the same dice off the ground before they then disappear. What does any of that mean? And can J.J. Abrams expand on this in Episode 9, using it in a meaningful way in the story? Whatever you think of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson left things in there that can be very useful and intriguing for the storytelling possibilities of Episode 9. Number 3. Palpatine needs to make sense. However it is that Palpatine is still alive in this era, or whatever form his presence takes, it needs to make sense and not feel ridiculous or cheesy or contrived. And it needs to be done in such a way that Return of the Jedi isn't diminished or weakened as a result of it. I still think the best writing choice would be for this not to be the physical flesh and blood Palpatine, but some other form of his presence, a Force echo of some kind, or or even the spirit of Palpatine somehow possessing some new body or some new vehicle. I have a feeling we are actually going to get real flesh and blood Palpatine, however, which I think could make things, well, problematic for this film. I mean, it could make for some great scenes, and who doesn't want to see Ian McDiarmid hamming it up once more as Sidious? But I just hope it makes some sense and doesn't end up feeling silly. And I hope it's also something that resonates with both the Darth Sidious of Revenge of the Sith and the Emperor Palpatine of Return of the Jedi. And essentially this falls back into the same category as not retconning Return of the Jedi, which is something I'm worried about. The Palpatine element of Episode 9 is probably the thing I'm really worried about, because it has the potential to go very wrong and to come off being very silly. So I just hope it's done in a really good and satisfying way that makes sense. Number 4. We need to know who Rey is, and who Rey really is. Not her ancestry necessarily, but the reason she's been chosen by the Force, and the purpose of her place in this story. Is she a new chosen one? A new virgin in the Force? Who left her on Jakku with Unkar Plutt in the first place, and why? Why was she having visions of the Acto Island long before she ever went there? These things need to be answered, even if her parentage remains an irrelevance. If Episode 9 fails to flesh out Rey as a character more, then we'll have had 3 films that will have failed to properly establish Rey, the main protagonist of the trilogy, as a character, and that's a really big problem for the whole trilogy. I like Rey, and I love Daisy Ridley's portrayal of the character, but we're coming to the 3rd film now, and she needs to be more than just a vague presence or a walking, talking mystery box. So I hope we really get answers this time. Okay, number 5. We really need to understand Reylo. And I say Reylo not in the romantic sense that lots of Reylo enthusiasts are yearning for. I don't think we need that. And I think Rey being in love with Kylo would cheapen Rey as a character at this point. But the obvious connection between Rey and Kylo needs to be brought to a suitable climax, and we need to understand why it's there and what it means. Their connection is clearly something deeply related to the Force and to the light side, dark side dynamic. So we need to explore what that is and what it's driving towards, and what it's been driving towards this whole time. My own theory on Rey and Kylo, specifically that they're respectively reincarnations, so to speak, of Anakin and Vader, is something that I'm happy to let go of, you know. But we need something in its place to offer some satisfying explanation for their deep bond. I think we should see some continuation of their Force bond, Skype from The Last Jedi, and I suspect that we're going to see Rey and Kylo work together. And the trailer shows Palpatine referring to their coming together as being of some importance, so that's good. And I really hope we get answers to what that bond really is between Rey and Kylo. and in a way that makes the previous two films seem even more relevant and even better. Number 6, we need a lot of Luke Skywalker. Again, it would be a big mistake for Episode 9 to either write Luke Skywalker out of the narrative or to diminish his role in these events. Aside from the fact that the end of the Skywalker saga needs to have Luke Skywalker significantly involved in it, Episode 9 also has the opportunity to appease the section of the fan community that was so upset with how Luke was handled in The Last Jedi. Whether this means Luke training Rey in Episode 9 or Luke being significantly involved in the confrontation with Palpatine, there needs to be enough space reserved for Luke in this final film. He needs to play a big part, is what I'm saying. The more Luke that there is in this film, the better. And even if he plays only a small part in the film in terms of screen time, the part that he does play needs to be really significant to the resolution of this saga. Okay, next, we need some explanation for Snoke. And it doesn't have to be in depth, but we need to know how Snoke was able to corrupt Ben Solo to such an extent that the child of the rebellion heroes, Han Solo and Leia Organa, not to mention nephew and student of Luke Skywalker, was able to be turned to the dark side, to the extent that he would murder his own father in cold blood. So far in this trilogy, we've had no real sense of why Ben Solo turned dark and abandoned his family, but we only know that Snoke's influence was a huge part of it, and that can't still be left unexplained at this point. The apparent return of Palpatine also gives the writers a chance to tie Snoke definitively into that, by showing some link between Snoke and Palpatine, or even by using this final opportunity to go the Darth Plagueis route and have Snoke's real identity be revealed. This is one thing I'm not confident Episode 9 is going to deliver on, but given that Abrams was the one to introduce us to Snoke in the first place in The Force Awakens, I'm hoping he'll also be enough of a completist to put the matter to rest here in Episode 9. But we need some explanation for Snoke, because also, if nothing else, having some explanation for Snoke would help to enhance or even improve the previous two films in the trilogy, and is therefore in the best interests of this trilogy as a whole. Okay, next. We need Anakin. We need Anakin Skywalker. We really do need Anakin. Again, if this is the end of the Skywalker saga, which is what we're being told it is, then there needs to be a reference to the core character of that saga, which is Anakin Skywalker, around whom the first 6 films revolve. They've missed the opportunity to do that so far in this trilogy. Much as I love the Yoda-Luke scene in The Last Jedi, a visit from Anakin's ghost to Luke on the island would have been much more powerful. Episode 9 is the last chance for Anakin to be a part of this trilogy. And, Hayden Christensen is available, so it would be a crime for this entire trilogy to pass by without a reference to Anakin at all. He doesn't necessarily have to play a big role, or even have a lot of screen time, but he needs to be a part of this narrative. Most of us would love to see Anakin involved with Luke somehow. Again, they really missed a chance for that in The Last Jedi. But the other rich possibility is for Anakin to come to his grandson, Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, and be a part of Ben's redemption. Something that would resonate richly, given that Anakin's and Ben's struggles are so similar, and that Ben Solo has essentially gone down the path that his grandfather once did. My fear is that Lucasfilm or Disney might be so allergic to the prequels that they refuse to go down this path, but it would be a really big mistake on their part to not have something between Anakin and Luke, or between Anakin and Kylo, would just be a really big missed opportunity. Okay, number 9. Leia needs a fitting send-off. I would actually be fine with Leia not dying at all, but remaining alive, even if we don't get to see a lot of her in the film. This would also make Leia's using the Force to save herself in The Last Jedi all the more meaningful and powerful. However, if it's decided to have her become one with the Force in Episode 9, I hope it's done in a fitting way. Also, if Kylo is redeemed in the movie, it would be wonderful for Ben Solo to have a scene with his mother. I'm pretty sure this was actually part of the original plan before Carrie sadly passed away, and the plans had to be changed. I don't know if this is even possible now, given the limited Carrie Fisher footage from The Force Awakens that they're using, but a Ben Leia scene would seem to be highly necessary. And whatever Leia's final scene or moment is, I really hope it's something fitting and resonant. Given the great affection that J.J. Abrams apparently has for Carrie Fisher, I'm sure it will be something good. I still feel like they should have rewritten The Last Jedi to have Leia end her story there and to have Luke survive into Episode 9. But that's all water under the bridge now, and I hope that the end for Leia in Episode 9 is something that really works well. Alright, and finally, number 10. We need R2D2. Need more R2D2. Aside from a key, beautiful moment in The Last Jedi with the Leia hologram, R2 has been on the sidelines for this sequel trilogy, barely involved. We need some role for R2 in this film, even if it's at the expense of BB-8. It looks like 3PO is definitely going to have a significant role in Episode 9, which is great. We just need for R2 to get the same treatment. He is too important a figure in the saga's tapestry and history to be left on the sidelines again, especially in this final film in the saga. So, more R2D2, please. And that's basically it. Those are the 10 points, the 10 things that I'm really laying down as things that Episode 9 really needs to be conscious of. The 10 things, the 10 criteria that I think The Rise of Skywalker needs to meet, you know, regardless of or in addition to all the other stuff it's going to be doing anyway. And I'm sure this film is going to be doing a lot. I feel like this film is very ambitious, and there are going to be a lot of things in this film and a lot of surprises. But these are just 10, 10 things that if I was making this film, I would be really, really conscious of as being very important. And one last thing. Here's to hoping that the Rise of Skywalker rises to the same heights as Return of the Jedi did and Revenge of the Sith did as the endings to their respective trilogies.